A 4-star general? You? Stop lying right now. The words landed hard as Officer Ramirez stepped directly into Jamal Washington's path, blocking his bike with a rigid arm and a stare sharp enough to cut through whatever innocence a 12-year-old boy should still have left. Kids like you don't have fathers at the Pentagon. So let's try that again. Who's your real daddy? Her tone held the certainty of someone who believed she already knew the truth. Jamal's hands tightened on the handlebars as he answered softly. Ma'am, my dad really is a 4-star general. She laughed under her breath, not amused, but offended. Son, if your daddy had 4 stars, he wouldn't let you ride around here, and he sure wouldn't let you talk to me like that. Now tell the truth before this gets worse. The threat was quiet, but it was unmistakable. Jamal felt the familiar sting in his chest, the sharp humiliation of being treated like a liar before he even explained himself. He tried again, voice steady. Please, ma'am. I'm not making it up. She shook her head, waved him off like a child caught pretending, and muttered, 4 stars. In Anacostia. That's a new one. Jamal rode the rest of the way home with the weight of those words pressing into him harder than the officer's presence. A reminder that disbelief came faster than fairness, and suspicion came easier than respect. Before we go into this story, tell me where you're watching from, subscribe to the channel, and give me a like so these stories can reach more people who care about dignity, justice, and the truth. Jamal pushed his bike through the door of the small apartment he shared with his parents. The place was warm, familiar, and quiet. But even here, he could still hear the officer's voice echoing in his mind. He set down his backpack with the careful discipline his father taught him, then sat at the kitchen table, replaying the encounter again and again. His mother, Dr. Serena Washington, stepped inside minutes later, still wearing the light fatigue of a long ER shift. She saw the look on his face before he said a word. She asked, gently, what happened? Jamal told her everything, the disbelief, the laughter, the cutting tone, the assumption that a child who looked like him could never be connected to someone who shaped national strategy. Serena sighed, not out of surprise but sorrow, because she had warned him this day would come. Turning 13 meant more responsibility for him and more fear for her. He nodded, but he couldn't hide his frustration. He wasn't trying to brag. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply tired of keeping silent about something that made him proud. When his father, General Darius Washington, walked in at sunset, the apartment felt different. Jamal always sensed the change, the quiet authority that entered the room even when Darius wore plain clothes. To the world, he was one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Army. To Jamal, he was simply Dad. But even that title carried weight. Darius noticed his son's tension immediately. After dinner, he took Jamal onto the small balcony and retrieved a folded American flag from its drawer. Together, they performed the evening ritual of retiring the colors. Darius guided every movement with patience, teaching not just technique, but pride. The kind of pride born from understanding what the flag had cost so many families over generations. When they finished, he rested a hand on Jamal's shoulder and asked what troubled him. Jamal hesitated, then explained the stop. He repeated the officer's words, her disbelief, her dismissal of his father's service. Darius listened with the discipline of a man trained to absorb information without reacting too quickly. When Jamal finished, silence hung for a long moment. Some people, Darius finally said, cannot imagine greatness coming from places they do not respect, and when they cannot imagine it, they deny it. That denial is not about you, it is about them. Jamal looked up, wanting to believe it, but the sting remained. He told his father he wanted to tell his friends the truth, to stop hiding, to stop acting like their family's reality was something shameful. Darius considered this carefully. The life he lived came with risks. His rank, his clearance, the sensitive missions. None of it was simple, but he also knew the cost of forcing a child to carry secrecy alone. After a long pause, he nodded. If you choose to tell them, speak with dignity, not anger, not defensiveness. The truth needs neither, but be prepared. Not everyone will believe you. Jamal accepted this with a maturity beyond his age, because he was accustomed to the world doubting him long before he opened his mouth. Serena joined them, and her voice carried both love and worry. People judge quickly. Baby, some will hear your truth and admire you. Others will twist it because they don't want to see you as anything but a stereotype. But you don't have to hide who you are. Her words steadied him. For the first time, Jamal felt permission, not to show off, not to boast, but to simply exist without shrinking. Later that night, when the apartment had gone still, Jamal lay in bed with his phone glowing softly in the dark. He opened the group chat, Deshawn, Tyler, and Sophia. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, thinking about the officer's voice, her disbelief, her certainty that his truth was impossible. That memory didn't silence him. It strengthened him. He began typing, slowly at first, then with purpose. Tomorrow at the park. I'm finally telling y'all who my dad really is. He read it twice, breathed deeply, and pressed send. He didn't know that those simple words would begin a chain of events that would shake an entire police district, expose more than one assumption, and lead to a moment so powerful that the whole park would fall silent when 3 black SUVs rolled up and the truth stepped out wearing 4 silver stars. Saturday, at exactly 2:47 p.m., Jamal Washington stood on a concrete bench in the middle of Marion Barry Jr. Park with a confidence he had never allowed himself to show before, and 20 kids gathered around him with the easy curiosity of a weekend afternoon. He held a small Bluetooth speaker in one hand, playing soft background music, and he cleared his throat as Deshawn lifted his phone and began streaming, telling the viewers they were about to hear something big. The children leaned in closer when Jamal said, in a steady voice, that he wanted to tell them who his father really was. He spoke of the man who tucked him in at night, who taught him respect, who corrected him gently, and who carried responsibilities heavier than any child could fully grasp. He told them about the day his father earned the Silver Star in Fallujah, when an enemy grenade landed near his squad and he threw himself forward without hesitation, saving lives that would have ended in that second. He explained how the medal was locked away in a safe at home, not because his father hid his bravery, but because trophies mattered far less to him than humility. The kids listened with wide eyes, and even the ones who usually joked or teased fell silent. Tyler Brooks, the white boy from Capitol Hill who was visiting for the first time, listened with a respectful seriousness that surprised the others. Sophia Ramirez clutched her backpack and asked softly if that kind of courage felt heavy to carry. Jamal nodded, not dramatically, but with the understanding of someone who had grown up in the presence of quiet greatness. Deshawn, always the showman, swung the camera around and said, "Y'all, this is crazy. His dad is literally..." But Jamal cut him off before he could say the rank aloud. "I'll tell you," he said, "but listen all the way through first." He took a breath. "My dad is a 4-star general." The reactions came instantly. Gasps from some, disbelief from others, stunned silence from a few more. A couple of boys muttered that nobody from the neighborhood had a parent that high-ranking. One girl asked if he meant retired or honorary, the way people sometimes exaggerated their parents' resumes. Jamal looked at all of them with a calm sincerity and repeated, "No, he's active. He works at the Pentagon. And I'm telling you because I'm tired of hiding it. He's my dad." Across the field, Two MPD officers from the 7th District, Officer Patricia Whitaker and Sergeant Marcus Cole, were finishing their routine foot patrol. Whitaker, a 25-year veteran with a reputation for strictness, heard fragments of the kids' conversation as they approached the group. Her face tightened when she picked out the words, 4 stars and my dad and Pentagon. She whispered under her breath, "Not this again." Cole glanced at her, sensing the tension. She had seen too many kids in this district make up uncles who were astronauts, cousins who were undercover agents, and fathers who were high-ranking military to avoid being questioned. In her mind, it always followed the same pattern: grand stories, fake connections, an attempt to divert suspicion. Cole, younger and more open-minded, didn't jump to conclusions, but Whitaker's decision was made the moment she heard the claim. "Let's break this up," she said, already stepping forward, when Whitaker reached the group. Her voice carried the tone of authority with no patience for negotiation. "All right. Everyone move along. Park isn't for speeches." Jamal stepped off the bench politely, hands visible, and said, "Yes, ma'am. We were just talking." She looked him over with a gaze she'd perfected over the years, searching for signs of trouble even when none existed. "What's your name?" she asked. Jamal answered calmly. Whitaker held out her hand. "ID." Jamal reached for his pocket, moving slowly the way his parents taught him, and handed her his school ID. She inspected it as if expecting it to reveal a lie. Then she looked at his locked phone, where his screensaver showed a photo of his father in uniform, face visible, but the stars on the shoulders blurred intentionally for security reasons. "Who's this supposed to be?" she asked. Jamal replied. "My dad." Whitaker snorted softly. "Right. Of course he is." She typed Jamal's name into her handheld device, waiting for results. It came back with a standard note. "Father. Government employee, a vague designation used for national security families." To Whitaker, it only confirmed what she already believed, that this was another boy making up stories. She returned the ID with a firm shake of her head. "Nice try," she said. "Now tell me who your father really is." The kids around Jamal grew silent. Tyler looked uncomfortable. Sophia took a step closer to Jamal. Sensing the tension rising, Jamal answered, still respectful. "Ma'am, that's the truth. Please call my mom if you need to." Whitaker's jaw tightened. She did not like being challenged, even politely, even by a child. "Let me make something clear," she said, lowering her voice. "A 4-star general does not raise his kids in this neighborhood, and he doesn't let them stand on benches bragging about medals." Jamal's heart thudded, but he kept his composure. "I wasn't bragging," he said. "I was answering a question." Whitaker crossed her arms. "Then answer mine. What are you really hiding?" Jamal blinked, stunned by the accusation. "Nothing, ma'am." But she was already reaching for her radio. Something about his calmness, his confidence, his refusal to back down from the truth made her even more certain that he was lying. Bias shaped her judgment more than evidence ever could. Cole stepped closer, sensing her escalation. "Patricia, he's a kid," he murmured. "Let's slow down." But Whitaker, hardened by years of trauma and the memory of losing her partner in an ambush, saw danger where none existed. She waved off Cole's concern and told the group of children to back up. Then she turned to Jamal, who was now standing alone in front of her, surrounded by a silent ring of friends. "You're coming with us for questioning." Jamal looked confused, frightened, and deeply offended all at once. "Ma'am, please don't do this. I'm telling the truth." Whitaker held up a hand. "I've had enough. Put the bike down. Now." Jamal obeyed. Cole tried again to interject. "Let's call his parents first." Whitaker ignored him and moved forward, her decision final. Jamal's friends watched in horror as she tightened her stance, preparing to take control of the situation as if confronting a threat rather than a child. Tyler whispered to Sophia. "He didn't do anything," Sophia whispered back. "I know." Deshaun kept filming, hands shaking, because he had seen enough in his short life to know that moments like this needed witnesses. Whitaker's expression hardened. She stepped so close that Jamal could feel her breath. "I'm going to ask you one last time. Who is your father?" Jamal felt something rise inside him. Not defiance, but dignity. A 4-star general. "Ma'am." Whitaker's face twisted. "Now I know you're lying. And with that." The situation began its sharp turn toward the moment that would shock the entire district. Officer Patricia Whitaker's voice cut through the air with a sharp finality when she said, "Turn around. Hands behind your back. I'm done playing games." The children around Jamal gasped, because even they understood how wrong it was to hear words like that directed at a boy whose voice still cracked when he was tired. Jamal felt the moment freeze inside him. He had heard warnings from his parents for years about how quickly a situation could change, how little room he had for mistakes, and how fast assumptions could become force. "Ma'am, please," he said quietly. "Just call my mother. She'll tell you everything." But Whitaker already had her hand on the handcuffs. She didn't raise her voice, but her tone carried an edge sharper than any shout. "You refuse to give truthful information. That's non-compliance. I'm not asking you again. Turn around. The park," which seconds earlier was filled with laughter and soft music from speakers, now felt like a stage for something no one wanted to see. Jamal turned slowly, the way he had been taught. No sudden movements, no gestures that could be misunderstood. His heart pounded so loudly he felt it in his throat. Whitaker grabbed one wrist, then the other, her grip rougher than necessary. The metallic snap of the cuffs locking into place felt like a siren, even though the park remained eerily silent. "Ma'am, please don't do this," he whispered, and his voice broke on the last word. But Whitaker's expression didn't soften. She looked at him with the certainty of someone convinced she had caught a liar, not restrained an innocent child. "I asked for honesty. Instead, I got a story. And when a kid lies to avoid a search, that tells me he's hiding something." The cuffs tightened as she spoke. Deshaun's phone never stopped recording. His hands trembled, but he kept the camera steady because something inside him said this video mattered. He captured Jamal standing small and alone, wrists bound behind him, eyes wide with fear he was fighting not to show. He captured Sophia, crying silently, trying to cover her mouth with both hands. He captured Tyler, pale and shaking, whispering into his emergency phone call that his friend was being arrested for no reason. No reason at all. "Please send somebody." He captured the tension growing in the air as strangers stopped, looked, and froze in disbelief at what they were witnessing. Whitaker radioed in for a transport vehicle with a clipped, procedural tone, juvenile male, non-compliant, suspected false identification, requesting pickup. She never once mentioned the truth he had given her. She never once questioned whether her suspicion came from evidence or prejudice. She simply acted, and in that act, she crossed a line that would soon be exposed to the entire nation. Sergeant Marcus Cole stood beside her, the discomfort growing visibly on his face. He had joined the force because he believed in serving the community he grew up in. He had seen kids lie before, but he had also seen officers assume the worst of children who simply looked a certain way. Right now, he saw both dynamics collide, and something in his chest clenched. "Patricia," he said quietly, "he's a kid. We should slow down." But Whitaker cut him off. "I know what I'm doing." Cole tried again, lowering his voice even more. "At least let's contact the parents." She turned sharply toward him. "You can do that after he's in the car." Jamal kept his eyes on the ground, trying not to cry. Not because he wasn't scared, He was terrified. But because he remembered his father telling him once that dignity was something no one could take unless he handed it over, he whispered, "When my dad finds out what you did, you'll see I was telling the truth." There was no threat in his voice, only a soft, hurt certainty. Whitaker laughed under her breath, a sound with no humor in it. "Son, 4-star generals don't raise their kids in Section 8 housing, and they don't let them stand around spinning stories in parks." Her words pierced him in ways she could never understand. She didn't know that his father lived humbly by choice, not necessity. She didn't know that Darius kept their address unlisted to avoid security risks. She didn't know that the faded apartment building she mocked had seen more love and discipline than many mansions could contain. She didn't know that the truth she dismissed so quickly was the truth that would soon bring the highest level of authority to her feet. As Whitaker tightened the cuffs once more, making sure they were secure, Jamal's friends began to shout, a chorus of young voices, small but courageous. "He didn't do anything. He's telling the truth. Leave him alone. Why are you arresting him?" Whitaker raised her hand sharply. "Back up, all of you. This is police business." Cole tried to regain control of the crowd with a calmer tone, but the damage was already done. Then came the pivotal moment. Subtle, but deeply important. Tyler Brooks, the white boy whose parents lived on Capitol Hill, stepped forward. His voice shook, but he forced himself to speak clearly. "Officer, please, I heard everything." He wasn't lying. "His dad really is someone important," Whitaker snapped. "And you know that how?" Tyler's voice cracked. "Because my mom works on the Hill. She's seen his dad before." It wasn't entirely true. Tyler didn't know for certain, but it was his desperate attempt to help a friend who didn't deserve any of this. Whitaker glared at him. "Stay out of this. This is not your concern." Sophia's cries grew louder. She watched Jamal stand in those cuffs, his shoulders trembling, his dignity strained but unbroken. She held Deshawn's arm and whispered, "Keep filming. Don't stop." And Deshawn, braver in this moment than he had ever been, said softly, "It's live. Everyone can see it." Whitaker didn't hear him. Or maybe she did and didn't care. Fear and bias had hardened into certainty. She pulled Jamal forward, guiding him roughly toward the patrol car. "You'll sit on the curb until the wagon arrives." Cole stepped beside her, his voice now firmer. "Patricia, you need to slow down. We don't have probable cause." But she turned, offended by his challenge. "I'm following procedure." Cole met her eyes with a quiet defiance she hadn't expected. "And I'm telling you we're crossing lines we shouldn't cross." But nothing changed. Nothing eased. Nothing stopped the inevitable. Jamal sat on the curb, handcuffed, surrounded by flashing radios and rising tension. He felt every stare on him, every whispered question, every assumption, and still, even as tears threatened, he kept his voice steady when he said, more to himself than anyone else, "My dad is a 4-star general. He'll come." Whitaker heard him and shook her head in disbelief. "Sure he is. And I'm the Queen of England." She walked away to confirm the transport status. Cole stood nearby, arms folded, fighting the sinking feeling that this moment would follow him for the rest of his life. And across the city, just a few miles away inside one of the most secure buildings in the world, a phone began to ring, a call that would change everything. At 2:59 p.m., in a secure conference room deep inside the Pentagon, General Darius Washington was reviewing intelligence briefings with a quiet concentration that had guided him across 7 combat tours and 3 decades of strategic command. His phone, silenced during the meeting, vibrated once, then again, the pattern unmistakably urgent. He glanced down, expecting a routine update. Nothing in his world ever rattled him. But when he saw the message from Serena, short and direct, his pulse changed for the first time in years. They've handcuffed Jamal. Anacostia Park. Come now." The words struck harder than any battlefield explosion he had ever survived. There was no hesitation, no second thought, no explanation offered. He stood, placed both hands on the table, and said in a calm tone that cut through the room with absolute authority, "Gentlemen, my son needs me." No one questioned him. No one dared. The meeting ended in an instant. By 3:02 p.m., his security detail was already moving. They didn't need orders. They saw the expression on his face, the controlled intensity that only appeared when something struck deeper than duty. 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans with military plates rolled out of the Pentagon motor pool. Lights off, sirens off, engines low and steady. They traveled across the 14th Street Bridge with a precision that looked casual, but wasn't. No weaving, no speeding, just a quiet, unstoppable advance toward the place where a boy sat handcuffed on a curb for telling the truth about the man who had sworn to serve a nation that still doubted his own son's dignity. Meanwhile, back at the park, tension continued to thicken around Jamal. He sat on the curb, wrists locked behind him, trying not to let fear take over. His voice, though soft, carried an unshakable certainty that puzzled even the strangers who gathered to watch. "He's coming," Jamal whispered to himself. "He always comes." The children stood around him, forming a small protective circle, though none of them could shield him from the humiliation of the moment. Tyler kept pacing, distraught, repeating, "This is wrong. This is so wrong." Sophia cried openly now, her hands shaking. Deshawn's live stream had crossed 2,000 viewers, then 10,000, then more. People in the comments begged someone to intervene, but no one did. Sergeant Marcus Cole stood several feet away, arms crossed, frustration building inside him. He knew what was happening wasn't right. He had grown up in neighborhoods like this one. He had seen kids treated like suspects before anyone bothered to ask their names. But the weight of rank kept him frozen. One wrong move could end his career. Still, something inside him kept whispering that silence was as dangerous as participation. Whitaker, meanwhile, stayed rigid in her conviction. She waited for the transport wagon, convinced she had made the correct call, convinced the boy wasn't telling the truth, convinced that a child with that level of clarity and calmness had something to hide. Her trauma had blinded her judgment, and she didn't see it. At 3:21 p.m., the first Suburban reached the edge of the park. It rolled to a slow stop, unannounced, unnoticed by most. Then the second, then the third. Their dark windows reflected the sun, giving no hint of who sat inside. But the moment the vehicles came to rest, something unexplainable shifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. Basketballs stopped bouncing. Music from portable speakers was turned off instinctively. A stillness swept across the park, not from fear, but from an instinctive understanding that something unusual, something momentous, was happening. Whitaker looked up, annoyed. She didn't recognize the plates. She didn't grasp the significance. She only saw unfamiliar vehicles and assumed disruption. She muttered, "What now?" Cole, however, felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had seen military convoys before, but never like this. Never in absolute silence. Never in a neighborhood park on a Saturday afternoon. He whispered almost to himself, "No, it can't be." At 3:24 p.m., the driver of the lead vehicle stepped out, dress uniform immaculate, white gloves on his hands, gaze straight ahead. He walked to the rear door, placed his hand on the handle, and opened it with the precision of someone who understood the weight of ceremonial protocol. The park held its breath. Phones rose into the air. Children stopped crying. Adults stepped back, unsure whether to watch or bow their heads. Then General Darius Washington stepped out. He emerged not with theatrics, not with anger, but with a presence that silenced the world around him. His dress blues were spotless, his service ribbons stretching across his chest like the history of a nation, and on each shoulder gleamed 4 silver stars that caught the afternoon light with a brilliance that was both beautiful and devastating. His posture was straight, calm, and unshakably controlled. He did not need to raise his voice to be heard. Authority radiated from him with every step he took. Children gasped. Parents whispered. Tyler pressed both hands to his mouth in disbelief. Deshawn's phone, still streaming, trembled as the comments exploded. Sophia stopped crying, stunned into silence, and Whitaker froze. She didn't breathe. She didn't blink. Everything inside her, every assumption, every certainty, fell through her like broken glass. Darius walked past her without acknowledgement, eyes locked only on his son. He reached the curb, bent down, and looked into Jamal's eyes. The boy, overwhelmed, tried to speak, but his voice broke. Darius placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "I'm here." Those 2 words were enough to break whatever fragile restraint Jamal had left. He leaned forward slightly, trembling from everything he had held in since the cuffs closed around his wrists. Then Darius turned his head, slowly, with the controlled precision of a man accustomed to issuing orders that change the course of battles. He fixed his gaze on Whitaker. "Officer, remove the handcuffs from my son. Now." No one had ever heard the word now delivered with such quiet force. It wasn't a demand. It was a command. It was law. It was judgment. It was truth snapping into place. Whitaker's breath caught. Her hands shook. She stepped forward, pale, trembling. No longer the confident veteran officer, but a woman confronted with the weight of her own assumptions. She fumbled for the key, her fingers slipping as she tried to steady herself. When she finally unlocked the cuffs, the click echoed through the park like a gavel striking a courtroom bench. Jamal collapsed into his father's arms. Darius caught him gently, holding him with the same strength he had once used to carry wounded soldiers across a battlefield. The crowd watched in reverent silence. Not one person spoke. Not one child moved. The truth had arrived, undeniable, unshakable, and standing 6 feet tall in full dress uniform. General Washington lifted his son slowly, keeping one arm around him, without raising his voice, without anger, without theatrics. He stood facing the officer who had handcuffed a child for telling the truth, and in that silence, deep, heavy, unforgettable, the entire park understood exactly what had just happened. A line had been crossed, a truth had been ignored, and justice had finally arrived. The silence that fell over the park after the handcuffs came off was unlike anything anyone there had ever witnessed. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't awe alone. It was the heavy, absolute quiet that descends when truth enters a space where it had been denied. General Darius Washington kept one hand on his son's shoulder as Jamal leaned into him, still shaken, still trying to steady his breath. Every child, every parent, every passerby stood frozen in place. Phones were raised but held respectfully, as if even the cameras understood that what came next required reverence, not noise. Officer Patricia Whitaker stood a few feet away, her cap in her trembling hand, the weight of her mistake crashing into her with each second that passed. She had seen commanding officers before, but nothing prepared her for the calm authority of a man who radiated power without needing to assert it. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Her throat tightened, her chest constricted, and she felt herself fold inward, understanding too late what she had done. General Washington rose to his full height and turned his body completely toward her. The park remained silent, as though even the wind refused to interrupt. His voice, when it finally came, carried the controlled resonance of a man who had addressed soldiers under fire and presidents behind closed doors. "Officer Whitaker, I asked you to remove the handcuffs from my son. You've done so. Now, I need you to listen to me." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He spoke with a steady, deliberate cadence, each word crafted with the precision of a man trained to communicate across languages, cultures, and crises. Whitaker swallowed hard, hands shaking so violently she had to clasp them together to hide the tremor. "Yes, sir," she whispered, unable to meet his eyes. Darius continued, his tone calm and deeply measured. "I have commanded brigades under fire. I have made decisions that affected thousands of lives. I have carried the burden of sending young men and women into danger. Yet today, I stand here because the greatest threat my 12-year-old son faced was the assumption that his truth was impossible because of where we live and what we look like." His words did not accuse, they revealed. They peeled back the layers of the moment with a steady, unyielding clarity. The crowd remained still, not wanting to breathe too loudly. Children held their parents' arms. Parents held their own breath. Even the birds seemed to pause. Whitaker swallowed, tears rising despite her efforts to control them. "Sir, I made a terrible mistake." The confession slipped out like breath pushed through breaking glass. She had suffered trauma. She had lost a partner. She had developed instincts that confused fear with danger. But none of that excused what she had done. She knew it. Cole knew it. Everyone watching knew it. Darius stepped 1 inch closer, not to intimidate, but to ensure she heard every word clearly. "Mistakes can be corrected, officer. But bias ignored cannot. Bias dismissed cannot. Bias unexamined becomes a danger to those you serve, to your colleagues, and to the uniform you wear." His voice held no bitterness, only truth sharpened by lived experience. Each sentence struck deeper than anger ever could. Whitaker nodded weakly, her throat tightening as tears finally spilled over. She tried to wipe them quickly, ashamed. She had never felt smaller. Sergeant Marcus Cole watched the exchange with a mix of grief, respect, and determination. He had wanted to intervene earlier. He wished he had risked more, pushed harder. But in this moment, as he watched a 4-star general speak without rage, yet with undeniable authority, Cole felt something shift inside him, a commitment to do better, to be better, to fight the complacency that had allowed situations like this to repeat far too many times. Darius then turned away from Whitaker and faced the group of children who had witnessed everything. His tone softened. "You did the right thing by watching, by recording, by refusing to look away. Never underestimate the power of your voice. Even at your age, what you saw today was wrong. But what you choose to do with what you saw, that will shape your future far more than this moment." He looked directly at Deshaun, who still held his phone. "Keep filming. Truth needs witnesses." It was not a request. It was permission, a validation, a guiding principle. He turned back to Whitaker, whose shoulders had slumped in the weight of shame. "Officer, I'm not here to destroy your career. That is not my purpose. But accountability must follow action. What matters now is not what you did, but what you choose to do next." There was no threat, only clarity. "My son is not your enemy. No child should ever be treated as one, especially not because of the neighborhood they come from." Whitaker's lips trembled. She nodded slowly, unable to stop crying. Her voice cracked when she finally managed to speak. "I understand, sir. I truly do." Jamal watched his father with awe and relief. He had expected fury, shouting, demands for punishment, but instead, his father used the same calm strength he used on battlefields and in war rooms. He didn't shout, he didn't rage. He simply illuminated the truth so clearly that no one in that park, not the officers, not the children, not the parents, would forget what they had heard. Then, in a moment that would appear in every news article and video recap that followed, Darius turned his back on Whitaker and addressed the entire park with a voice strong enough to carry but gentle enough not to frighten. This moment is not about shame. It is about growth. It is about responsibility. It is about the cost of assumptions. What happened here must not become another story shared in anger, but a lesson shared with purpose. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. We cannot change the past, but we can choose what we become after it. There was no applause. There was no cheering. Just the heavy, reverent silence of a community witnessing something profound. A moment of reckoning delivered not with violence, not with rage, but with dignity so powerful it demanded respect. As he finished speaking, he placed a protective hand on Jamal's back and helped him stand fully upright. The boy's breathing steadied, his shoulders lifted, his dignity restored. Whitaker wiped her tears and lowered her head in shame. Not because she had been humiliated, but because she had been confronted with a truth she could no longer deny. Darius looked at Cole next. Their eyes met. Cole straightened unconsciously, recognizing the message behind the general's steady gaze. Do better. Not later. Now. And so the moment ended. Not with shouting, not with arrests, not with chaos, but with a silence that carried more weight than any siren. A silence that marked the turning point. A silence that followed Jamar and his parents out of the park as they walked slowly toward the Suburbans. A silence that held within it the first breaths of reform, accountability, and the beginning of change that would ripple far beyond that Saturday afternoon in Anacostia. 90 days after the moment that froze an entire park, the city of Washington. D.C. looked different, not louder, not angrier, but more alert, more aware, and more willing to confront what had unfolded in broad daylight before thousands of eyes and millions more online. The video Deshaun had streamed reached 50 million views within the first 72 hours. It played on every major news network, dissected by commentators who spoke in stunned tones about the sight of a decorated four-star general standing over his handcuffed son. It played in police academies as an example of assumption gone wrong. It played in classrooms where teachers paused, looked at their students, and asked questions no curriculum had ever included. And, perhaps most importantly, it played in the quiet offices of city leadership, where silence followed each viewing the same way it had fallen over Marion Barry Jr. Park that afternoon. The city had no choice but to respond, not with press conferences alone, but with genuine action that acknowledged the gravity of the moment, inside the Internal Affairs Division of the Metropolitan Police Department. The investigation into Officer Patricia Whitaker moved with a speed rarely seen in cases involving veteran officers. Every step of her encounter with Jamal was scrutinized. Her body cam footage, her radio calls, witness statements from children and adults, and even her performance evaluations from the past decade. The picture that emerged was painful but undeniable. Whitaker had allowed fear, bias, and deep unresolved trauma to dictate her judgment. She had dismissed a child's truth because it did not fit her assumptions, and she had escalated a peaceful situation into an unnecessary detention without reasonable suspicion or probable cause, when Internal Affairs finally issued its findings. The language was firm and unambiguous. Complaint sustained. Officer acted outside established juvenile detention protocols. Officer escalated without cause. Officer demonstrated bias-affected decision-making. For the first time in her 25 years on the force, Patricia Whitaker was suspended, 30 days without pay. She was mandated to complete 120 hours of implicit bias training, trauma-informed policing coursework, and de-escalation certification. Her assignment was changed to desk duty pending ongoing performance review. The decision was not vengeance. It was accountability. The kind she had once advocated for in her early years before grief hardened her vision. Sergeant Marcus Cole, who had watched the incident unfold with mounting concern, testified openly and honestly. He explained his attempts to intervene, his doubts, and his regret for not pushing harder. His honesty earned him respect within the department and positioned him as someone who might help lead the cultural change needed to prevent future incidents. In a quiet moment after the hearing, he told himself he would never again choose silence when truth required courage. Chief Lorraine Hayes, commander of the 7th District, held a press conference the day the findings were released. Her tone was not defensive, but resolute. "What happened to young Jamal Washington should never have happened," she stated plainly. "We failed him. We failed his family. And we failed the standard we owe to every child in our care." Her announcement that followed shifted the city. 5 immediate department-wide reforms were enacted under her authority. First, body cameras became mandatory for all officers in the 7th District during any contact with juveniles. The department had previously allowed partial discretion. Now, there would be none. Second, handcuffing children under 14 was prohibited unless there was an imminent threat to safety. The language was straightforward. Being disbelieved was not a threat. Third, weekly Coffee with a Cop events were established at Marion Barry Jr. Park, designed as unstructured moments where officers would listen rather than speak, learn rather than lecture. Fourth, a new independent civilian review board was granted subpoena power, ensuring the community had a voice not just in complaints, but in accountability. And fifth, Whitaker herself, once she completed her retraining, would join the department's education staff, using her own body cam footage and Deshawn's live stream as case studies to teach new recruits the cost of unchecked assumptions. Her acceptance of this assignment was humbling, painful, and necessary. Jamal, meanwhile, found himself at the center of a movement he never asked to lead. He returned to school quietly, determined not to become a symbol but to continue being a boy who loved science, chess, and basketball. Yet his classmates looked at him differently, not with pity, but with an awareness of the resilience he carried. Teachers approached him with cautious compassion, wanting to support him without overwhelming him. His mother, Serena, remained protective but proud, knowing that trauma had touched him but not broken him. His father, Darius, remained steady, guiding him through each step with the same calm strength he had shown in the park. The most unexpected change came from the children who had witnessed everything. Sophia suggested they start a monthly meeting in the community center. Tyler offered to help. Deshawn, who had gained a massive online following after the video, insisted on naming it something meaningful. And so, Truth Circle was born, a simple, quiet space where kids told their stories without interruption, and officers were required to sit, listen, and respond without defensiveness. It was small at first, then grew larger, then became a program endorsed citywide. What began as a child's moment of honesty became a platform where truth was not dismissed, but honored. General Washington never used his rank to force further consequences or public humiliation. He did not appear on television. He did not call for anyone's resignation. His only public statement was brief and measured. "My son told the truth. He deserved to be believed." The reforms enacted are a step toward ensuring that truth is respected for all children, not just mine. His restraint spoke louder than any condemnation could have. The country recognized the dignity of a man who carried authority, yet chose accountability over punishment. Whitaker, after serving her suspension, returned to duty with visible humility. Her first day back, she requested permission to speak at Truth Circle. When she arrived, she removed her cap and addressed the children directly. Her voice trembled but remained honest. "I let my fear speak louder than my reason. I let my assumptions speak louder than your truth. I can't undo what happened, but I can learn from it. And I will." Jamal listened quietly, neither forgiving nor condemning, but acknowledging her words with a maturity beyond his years. The city slowly moved forward, not forgetting, not excusing, but acknowledging and growing. The incident didn't lead to lawsuits or public shouting or political warfare. It led to reform. It led to introspection. It led to conversations that had long been avoided. Washington, D.C. didn't become perfect overnight, but it became more honest, more accountable, and more aware of the truths spoken by the youngest voices in its most overlooked neighborhoods. And at the center of it all stood a 12-year-old boy who had once been handcuffed for telling the truth, and who, without intending to, helped an entire city begin to listen more carefully, more humbly, and more humanely, 90 days after the reforms took effect. The conversation around the city had shifted from outrage to responsibility, from disbelief to understanding. Yet the truth that remained beneath all of it, the quiet truth, the statistical truth, the truth written in numbers instead of sentiment, was far heavier than any single incident could ever capture. Those numbers did not shout. They did not cry. They did not carry emotion on their faces the way Jamal had when the handcuffs closed around his wrists. But they told a story that every adult in the city needed to hear, no matter how uncomfortable it felt. And so, on a warm weekday evening, inside the packed community center that now hosted the monthly Truth Circle, a projector screen lit up with the facts that framed not just Jamal's experience, but the experience of thousands of children across the country. The room grew quiet as the first slide appeared. Black children are 6 times more likely to be killed by police than white children. The number hung in the air like a weight. It did not shock the parents in the room. It pained them, but it did not surprise them. They had lived it, feared it, warned their children about it. The officers sitting among them shifted in their seats, not defensively, but reflectively. The number was not an accusation. It was a mirror that demanded honesty, a mirror that forced the city to acknowledge that what happened to Jamal was not a rare anomaly. It was a symptom of something larger, deeper, older. The next slide appeared. Black youth are 21 times more likely to be killed by police than their white peers. 21 times. No exaggeration, no emotional framing, just the stark truth of a country still struggling with a burden it had never fully confronted. A mother in the front row placed her hand on her chest, her breath catching for a moment. A father lowered his head. An officer closed his eyes, absorbing the weight of the disparity. And in the middle of the room, Jamal sat quietly, not frightened, not overwhelmed, but deeply aware that the numbers were not abstract. They were a reflection of what almost happened to him. The third slide. Black children make up 32% of all juvenile arrests, despite representing only 15% of the nation's child population. That disproportion did not feel academic. It felt personal. It felt like a statistic wrapped around a childhood that had to grow up too fast. It felt like proof of why a 12-year-old boy riding a bike in his own neighborhood had been stopped 5 times in 1 year. It felt like the shadow that followed children like Jamal every time they stepped outside. Officers in the room exchanged glances. Some nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth they had seen but rarely articulated. Others swallowed their discomfort, recognizing that numbers this stark left no room for excuses. The final slide, perhaps the most sobering, quoted a national survey. 1 in 3 officers admits that racial bias affects their decision-making. Not 1 in 100, not 1 in 50, 1 in 3, and if 1 in 3 admitted it, the true number was likely higher. The room did not shift. No one whispered. No one gasped. Instead, a deep, steady silence filled the space. A silence people feel when they recognize that truth requires action, not avoidance. General Washington stood at the front of the room, not in uniform, not with medals on his chest, but in a simple dark suit that conveyed dignity without formality. He did not dominate the space. He guided it. And when he finally spoke, his voice held the same calm weight it had carried in the park, the same quiet authority that had silenced chaos without raising a single decibel. Numbers do not lie. He said, children do not lie. And when the experiences of our children align with the statistics of our nation, it is not an accident. It is a call to responsibility. He paused, letting the truth settle. My son survived his moment because the world saw it. Others have not been so fortunate. He stepped away from the projector and addressed the room with a softness that carried deeper power than anger ever could. This is not a story about bad officers, and it is not a story about perfect children. It is a story about assumptions that cost dignity, safety, and in too many cases, lives. He looked at the officers present. No one here can change the entire system alone, but each of you can change the next moment, the next interaction, the next assumption. He turned toward the children seated near the front. Jamal, Sophia, Tyler, and Deshaun looked back at him with a mixture of admiration and understanding. And for you, Darius continued, your truth matters, even when it is dismissed, even when it is doubted, even when someone tells you that your truth is too big for where you're from. His voice softened further. Hold your truth with dignity, speak it with courage, and do not shrink yourself for anyone who refuses to see you clearly. Sergeant Cole, now heavily involved in outreach efforts, added his own words. We cannot ask these children to carry themselves differently until we carry ourselves differently too. We owe them better than disbelief. We owe them better than fear disguised as suspicion. It was a simple statement, but its sincerity carried through the room like a quiet breeze shifting the air. Then came the moment that defined the closing of the 90-day chapter. The projector turned off. The room reverted to natural light, and General Washington asked a question, not with the tone of a man demanding an answer, but with the steady, reflective cadence of a man inviting introspection. The next time a black child tells you something that seems too big for the neighborhood they're from, will you demand proof? He let the question rest on the room, or will you simply listen? The silence that followed was not heavy with guilt. It was full of contemplation, full of recognition, full of a quiet, shared responsibility that could not be denied. He continued, in a lower voice, because sometimes the truth doesn't need to be proven, it only needs to be believed. The room breathed in as one. Parents nodded, officers lowered their heads, children held their friends' hands, and Jamal, once handcuffed for telling the truth, sat with his back straight, his eyes steady, knowing that the world still had a long way to go, but also knowing that he had helped push it a little farther along the right path. There was no applause. Truth did not require it. There was only a shared understanding that the numbers had been heard, the lesson absorbed, and the responsibility accepted. And as the meeting ended, and families stepped into the cool evening air, one thought lingered in every mind. Quiet, powerful, unforgettable. Listening could save a child's life. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe and give the video a like. Your support helps these stories reach more people.